All right. So, authors, are we ready to check in? Cool. This check-in question has been inspired by Karin and Lisa's book. So here goes. I'm going to invite either Karin or Lisa to start and then hand over to the other, and then you can kind of nominate one another until everyone has checked in. So the question is, please share with us your intended way of being during this discussion. Over to you.
Shall I go first, Karin? So yeah, this is a question that my colleague and I asked each other when we were leading a training today, in fact. How I'd like to be is, I find a good way of being for me is to be kind of bemused, to be kind of like, you know, curious and interested and lighthearted and to enjoy it. So that's how I would like to be in this discussion. Was there another part of the check-in, or it was just that question, right, Mark?
I think that's right. Yes. Yeah.
Great.
For me, I would like to be interested, curious, and listening.
And would you like to nominate who's next, please, Karin?
Sorry, Pim.
I'd like to be challenged today, especially when we're talking about how to put it into practice. It would be nice to get some really tough questions from people to really get started on how to do things, because this is the toughest part of everything. So mostly challenged, actually. Samantha, how about you?
So my natural is the listening and curiosity space. So I might have to be more intentional about taking my voice and sharing my experiences. And Susan.
Yes to everything that's been said before, and I am going to keep smiling and try to maintain this a bit of a feeling of levity, both in my own kind of way of showing up and in this conversation. Aaron.
Thank you. I intend to be distracted by the conversation, and I intend to be transported by it. I would like to be without time and space for this hour, just in the conversation presently. And I will throw it to Richard.
Thank you. I love all these nice intentions that people have suggested, all very earnest. My honest intention is like, I want people to think that I'm really smart and come out feeling that glow of having people's attention pointing at me, and that I say something really, really cool. It's the honest driver. And I'm going to try and override that with some, these things like curiosity and challenge and listening and those sorts of things. So I'll find a balance between those two poles, maybe. What about you, Mark?
Hey, Rich. Yeah, I think all it is my intention, and kind of I've learned so much from all of you already, and yeah, there's some of the stuff that I read from you guys challenges me more than kind of challenges me quite a lot. So I'm really curious to hear from those more challenging aspects of what you guys say and write about. I'm going to remind you of the theme again. So we'll kick off the discussion with the theme. New ways of working sound great. Where do we start? We've got about 50 minutes now that we're all checked in. I'll give you a heads up when we are kind of approaching the end. And once we're at the end, where there's an option to hang around, and we'll kind of move into breakout rooms and have small circle discussions. So that's a practice that you can take back to the office tomorrow, or well, to Zoom tomorrow, and put into practice to carry on discussions around new ways of working. So I'll see you in around about an hour. And Bulent, thank you for turning your video off. See you in 15 minutes.
I'm curious, like I have a proposal for how we might start this, and I'd love to just hear from everybody about imagining the first conversation you're having with a leader who's starting to first speak the words to articulate that they're ready to do something different. Is there any sort of patterns in those initial conversations? What does it feel? What does it feel like for you when you're in the presence of somebody who is first starting to articulate what they see as possible?
I feel like it's shifted for me. It used to be, excitement and enthusiasm and electricity around their openness, but now through many hundreds of experiments, there's a little bit of skepticism too, and also empathy for them. So I usually start more with a curiosity around why. Why do you want this? Why are you excited about this? Like what's really going on underneath? Because it turns out there's a lot of reasons to covet this, and not all of them are going to get you all the way there.
I had a conversation this week with somebody, and I found myself asking the question, are you aware of how far you're ready to go? Like, where's your boundary? And just watching him work through the answer to that was really, truly fascinating, because it took him to the whole point of questioning whether he would actually invite employees in to become shareholders with him. And
that's a cool question.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see that happen.
Yeah. Okay, I think I would listen for what is there, and I would listen for, is there insight about what self-management might be? Is there self-insight about yourself? And is there commitment, and is there courage? So to sort of estimate the prerequisites.
To me, there seems to be quite a big difference between people embarking on a transformation like this, personally, and therefore sometimes also their organization, as if they're the leader of that organization. Like sometimes it's really from an honest starting point, where they truly believe that if you give people more freedom, more decision-making power, more responsibility, more accountability, they will enjoy it, they will flourish, and they will also achieve better results for the business. But there's also quite a big group, actually, from what we've seen. Also companies that have been listed on our bucket list that we thought were truly inspiring and really in it for the right reasons. And then we came there and we talked to both leaders and employees in those companies. Sometimes we figured out it was, or we sensed it was more about the fact that it was hip and it was popular, and that a lot of people are talking about self-management, and that it sounds really cool if you're a leader talking about topics like this. And you can feel it in the way they organize themselves, to feel it in the way they communicate with one another, that it's just not 100% sincere. And maybe that's also being a part of on the transformation journey towards getting there. But you can feel it immediately. And that's what we've feel very strongly that really when you talk to people, you understand truly the level of how advanced they are, or advanced is not the right word, but how sincere they are about these approaches. And the more sincere, the more powerful the changes can be.
I have a small request I'd like to make in the spirit of Priya Parker's rant about sanitized conversations online. If we're all on mute, there's no burstiness possible, and there's no hearing an or an or what have you. And I don't mind hearing y'all's dogs and vacuum cleaners and kids and whatnot. So, I mean, if you want to be on mute, I can't make you not be, but I would love to be more free together.
Woohoo! You have no idea what's about to happen in this house, so I'm just saying.
I mean, mileage may vary. Like, do what you need to do, but don't mute on my account is all.
And what's coming up for me is I imagine most, if not all of you, my fellow fish here, have had conversations with people who've come to you and said like, hey, we want to go teal, or hey, we want to be self-managed. And I think, there's such a trap in that, like, I don't know how, it feels like such a name drop thing to say this now, but when I was talking to Frederick Laloux, he said this great thing about it, that like, no one wants to become a concept. So it's not inspiring to say like, hey guys, I want us to go teal. And people are like, what's teal? Like, oh, I haven't read the book. What was I supposed to read that book? So I think it's more interesting, like, as you've been saying, all of you, like to kind of go beneath that question. And the two questions that he offered up that I think are really juicy questions are like, what am I no longer okay with? And what am I really yearning for? Because then you get to the point of like, well, I'm not okay with that only certain people get to make decisions when it comes to things like this, or I'm not okay with like our impact on the environment, or I'm really yearning for, it becomes so much more like alive when you ask those questions rather than like, so how do you think you'd like to be teal or whatever?
Yeah. I think I also listen for how much the person sees themselves as someone who is also going to be challenged in the journey versus, oh, there's this thing I want the others to get into, or this is this thing that I would like us to change in the system. And oh my gosh, I'm part of the system. So this is going to be scary for me too.
I think for me, in a direct response, Susan, to your question, like what's the patterns that come up in these conversations for me? There's two parts. There's one which is really big, which is like, I guess this is my own thing about why, and for me, it's about when I look into the immediate future in the world, I'm quite frightened about what's coming, whether that's, a massive loss of life and biodiversity because of climate disruption, or it's this tons of people losing their homes because of war, or is Europe going to make it? Is the United States going to make it? These kind of really big questions. And I have my integrity demands that I'm doing something that stacks up against the size of those challenges. And I also feel I need to say those things. That's really a common place for me to start a conversation, is just to reveal that fear and check, do you feel something of this too, and what's your piece of the puzzle that you're going to take responsibility for, because you can't do the whole lot. And then the other half is a lot smaller, which is just like, who are your people outside of the organization? Because within the boundary of the organization, there's all these forces that can hold people in one place. And often it takes a few external peers to disrupt those dynamics and to have some champions and allies and coaches and angels and friends that can hold you up even when you might be stuck in your organization and not making any headway at all for a year or two, but still be growing externally because of those contexts.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Rich, that, that the cliche is it takes a village. I mean, it takes allies, friends, supporters, coaches, cheerleaders, because this is big work. This is not work for the faint-hearted. I'm curious, what is there anything that any of you have seen regularly as like warning signs? I think I've told this story, hopefully I've not told this story here before, but in the very early days of the accompaniment work that we've all been doing after Frederick's book was published, I worked with an organization who was all in for self-management. They'd even published a handbook about how they were self-managing. But the actual reason was that the CEO had told the investors that if we do it this way, we're never going to have to hire middle managers. So that expense is not going to be in the balance sheet. And so this is why we're going to do it. And that it always comes back to me, and it always still disturbs me. I haven't seen anything as blatant maybe in the 5 years since that particular thing happened, but I'm just curious, are there any patterns or like warning signs, like pull up terrain that you see with people that are starting?
That was the example she mentioned.
Exactly. It's stopping now.
I don't know why, but I have more fun, I guess, with those scenarios than maybe I should, which is I have this optimism that like, even if we go in for the wrong reasons, sometimes the journey can still be transformative. And so I don't hold out the same hope or the same esteem that I do for ones that start from a real like rooted, centered, soulful reason. But it is kind of fun if someone's just like, I just wish we were faster. And I'm like, cool, guess what it takes to be faster? Diversity, inclusion, engagement, power, like all that stuff. And suddenly there is a learning journey that we're on. If there's enough room for that, if there's enough space for that, that can be fun to me, I guess, like watch layers open. But to your point, it can also be like major cluster and crash and burn as well, I would say, with 50-50 odds. So I hear you. And also I like, part of me is like, ooh, I want to play with that crazy bastard and see what we can learn by chasing that wrong-headed ideal.
So, and then the question is, and I'm curious to hear from you guys about this, looking at the topic of today's chat, like, where do we start? So looking from I guess most of the people in this conversation or watching this conversation are already convinced, like they want to implement or progress their ways of working. So where do they start? Because I guess also the majority, well, in fact, the majority of all people, they're not CEOs, and probably also not people in the conversation here, or not most of them. So where can they start according to your experiences?
Yeah, I can start. One way to start is to bring up 3 questions, like, what is it that we're talking about? Because I see there are always like different interpretations in a group of people that want to be more self-managed. So they don't know what they're talking about, but they think they know what they're talking about. And also there is no it thing, of course, but so they are clear on each other's pictures. And then is the big why should we do it? Because the upsides needs to be huge because it's so hard. And then it's what's in it for me, each and every one. So those 2 questions are great places to start from. And then, of course, from my perspective, to start with the culture and create a trust-based working climate. That's my view.
I just keep on hearing Samantha's voice in my head. And I am yet to be convinced that an organization can truly transform unless the person that currently holds the reins of power is willing to not only loosen that, but participate in what happens moving forward completely. And for me, it's really getting real about that conversation. And if the answer is, it may be as brave as Richard's was in the beginning, it's like, I'm scared shitless. I don't know how to do this. I need help. Can you stand shoulder to shoulder with me? I know I'm going to mess up. I don't want to look like a dick. People trust me. People expect me to have the answer. People are going to think that this is just another one of my harebrained schemes. But I know it's different. Can you help me? And so I'm almost thinking that that's the beginning point. Like unless or until one can have that real conversation, yeah, you can try little things. And that might eventually get that person to that clarity. So maybe what I'm trying to say is maybe the role of those of us that are helpers is to help the leader get to clarity. Maybe that's how to start.
It's funny because that provokes for me like the importance of context. So the two other vectors other than leader or power, let's just say power readiness, for me are size and safety. So I feel like we have two kind of clients that come in the door and we very rarely get the third. One client is in distress, like everything is wrecked and we have to fix it because we're like the platform is on fire. And the other is we are already excellent and we pride ourselves on excellence and we're disciplined and we're principled and we've found some new values or some new principles that we now want to add to our excellence. And so that like it's a becoming. I very rarely get like it's going all right and like nothing's broke, but also we're not that good at what we do. And so we're just here to, to figure out this whole self-management thing. So that context, and then the scale one is the other one, which is just like, if somebody comes in the door and they're at the head of 20,000 people with 80 years of history, that's a very different first conversation for me than someone that's like, my 10-person firm wants to go teal. Like, it couldn't be more different, right? And so I think getting real about the why and the goals and the moves, in both cases, obviously the power player, or the power person needs to do their own work immediately, but the expectations are so different. So I don't know what that provokes, but that's where my head went.
I still think it's like what we're talking about thus far is about the shift of the organization, but then there's the whole part of just human beings and individuals who are stepping into their agency and learning to trust and become self-aware of the individual and collective purpose and interest, and thinking about autonomy and how they're stepping up and leaving space or not stepping up and could more, like all of those things at an individual level that actually help us to live with our fellow human beings in more harmonious and enlivening ways, which is for me just valuable in and of itself. So yeah, there's like, let's get this organization changed and have a strategy and roll it out and all of that. And then there's just like, let's just invest in ourselves as human beings.
Yeah, listening to you all, it sort of occurred to me that I'm almost thinking of like the 12-step program, in AA, that for me, there's like a mindset part where you start by acknowledging that we're in a paradigm, right? We've all been conditioned into a particular way of not just working, but as you say, Samantha, being, relating to each other in society generally. So it's like starting by like acknowledging I have a problem almost, and then I need help, whether that's getting in external support or whether that's just help from your peers. Like, I don't think you can do this alone. And then, sort of going on a program of development. So I'm starting to like crystallize in my mind that for me, there are these three pieces. There's like the kind of mindset piece, like being aware that I have like a kind of a blind spot of how I'm relating, how I'm seeing things that I can't know unless I get feedback from other people and kind of help on how I'm showing up that's going against this thing that we all want, especially if I'm like someone in power, right? That I have to learn how to sort of step back and to choose when to step in and when to step back and all of that. And then the second piece for me, and this is one of the main things I've learned from Karin and the years that I've known her, is different kinds of dialogues, like that we are what we habitually do. And so every dialogue that we have needs to be, we need to think about that differently. Like, and again, if you're in power, like how can you place the responsibility with the group and not have a way of being that I alone or I have to get the group to do this, or I have to, you know, that's a different kind of dialogue. Or talking about what's under the surface, which we so rarely do in workplaces, that wholeness piece, and also talking about what's going on underneath. And then the third piece for me is the systems, right? And you know, Mickey Cashton and Frederick Laloux both talk about that there are at least kind of 5 main ones that we need to reinvent. If we don't look at these, we're just going to inherit the old ones. And they're things like decision making, how we allocate resources, conflict transformation, how we share information, and then some kind of feedback loop. And it seems like agreements, clarity of roles, and decisions are 3 key like processes that are kind of foundational. You need to have some kind of clarity. And I think like, you know, I think all of us have different ideas perhaps about which one you start with or which one's most important. And for me, I'm not so interested in that really. I think all are important and kind of interdependent.
I love that, Lisa, of admitting that we all have a problem. My problem is a mix of narcissism and a need to dominate others. And it really gets in the way, you know, of sharing power. I want to come back though with a clean answer for Pim's question about where to start, because I think there are probably a lot of people that are listening in that have some degree of familiarity with the territory, but maybe not a huge amount of influence in the role that they're currently in, and they're like sniffing around, where's the lever that I'm going to push on? And often when I'm with people in that position, I start with a recommendation to find a place to practice. Like that's the bottleneck, is practice. It's not theory. It's having other people who are going to practice doing a different kind of relationship with you. And sometimes, you know, you can find a place within your organization. There's a little bubble where you're doing innovation or something, or there's like some, you know, the room that has all the Post-it notes in it, and you can practice a little bit there. But often you have to step out of the organization and, you know, go to Burning Man or something like that, or join a community of practice that's, well, start a community garden, or, you know, like just, it doesn't have to be massive or worthy, but just a space to practice that. What does it look like if we use a different approach to decision making? Or what does it look like if all the information is transparent? Like, and once you've got a little bit of that practice under your belt, suddenly you're already super qualified compared to a lot of people who are, you know, consulting and advising and writing like us, who've got all these ideas about how it works. It's actually the practice that's in the short supply.
And also something that's coming up the back channel here with me from Fiona is about, what about legal things? What about things that can't change? What about things that just from a compliance perspective just are? And some of these things you're not going to be able to change, but bringing awareness to them and naming them as things that just are, we can see them. We can't change them yet, but the clarity around who is responsible and accountable, whose role it is, what good looks like in completing whatever tasks might be related to this particular thing that is currently unchangeable. It's okay. You're not there. Every organization is going to have things like that, but it's about naming the water, seeing what's what, and bringing these things to the surface.
And speaking of surface, I think there's something like under the surface that's almost in the invisible space or kind of off people's radar that I'm really starting to hone in on when I'm working with organizations. One is listening, how our listening culture is, and even our paradigms around listening. And the other is how we work with time and all of our assumptions around time. Because it's like, how can you open up something, a process to wider people if you think that you don't have a listening culture and you think that that's just going to create chaos and exhaustion and overrunning with time. And if you actually haven't had a positive experience of where people can have quality listening with each other and don't have to resolve everything all of the time, and can know how to let things hover in the middle and not have to speak everything through or have a debate all the time. If you haven't got that established, it is difficult to open up to the collective. And listening culture and the way we work with time are kind of like just really little tiny things that have huge impact.
At least for the bigger systems or systems that are more tied up and in the straitjacket with themselves, I do find that just like finding little phrases or turns of phrase that remind you of a principle or remind you of a thing that you're trying to do differently is really powerful. So like just saying like something like safe to try, I find to be wildly spreading, like it becomes like this reminder to check in with thinking differently that we didn't normally do. And you can do the same thing around any principle, any idea, but like getting those seeds planted and explaining one simple phrase and what it means, and then maybe having an experience around it that then sticks, I think opens up a lot of possibility for behavior difference and dialogue difference, which then can lead to system changes. And the other thing is I really liked what you were saying, Rich, about like go find places to practice, and it could be with teams, it could be really big, big scale real projects and stuff, but also like we had David Marquetta on the podcast a while ago, and he was like, just go to a restaurant and let the waiter order for you. Just do that. That's your goal for this week. Like just get someone to order food for you, and you don't get to pick, even though you're the CEO and you're the big, you're the big dude. And it was like, great. That'd actually be hard. That'd be hard for me. Like I'm real choosy about everything. I spend 30 minutes in the toothbrush aisle and my wife yells at me, like I want everything to be the perfect choice. So the idea that we would just let something go in our day-to-day life is a neat practice to sort of stretch.
Yeah, I think especially like so you guys mentioned some of the elements as well. And like experimentation, I think is so important in trying new ways of working. Like we can all constantly continue to talk about, are we ready yet? Is our mindset completely where we want it to be before we can make a change like this? And I don't really believe in that. So to a certain extent, but I'm a much bigger fan, and probably because that's my personal bias, but a big fan of just trying it. And just if like a very simple place to start for many people, wherever you are in an organization, is to sit down with your team and let everybody write down or share their biggest frustrations in how you work. Could be the way you make decisions, could be the lack of transparency, could be a hierarchical leader or authoritarian leader. Just put them all on the table. Talk about the things you can influence and the things you cannot influence, because I liked about what Susan said, that some things you simply cannot influence. Even CEOs have so much constraints of things they cannot change. We all think they're super powerful, but if you talk to them, in fact, most of them don't really feel that powerful if it comes to changing their organization. So the things that you cannot change, just leave them. Just let them be for now, and just start experimenting and trying things that you can actually influence. For example, in a team, the way you distribute roles, or the way you make decisions, or the way you create clarity around who picks up what tasks. These kind of things you can experiment. Just set up an experiment for 1 month or 2 months and evaluate it after 2 weeks, after 4 weeks, and after 8 weeks. And just start talking about whether it's making an improvement or not. And I think if you start with these very small things, slowly but surely the conversation will advance, and you will start to pick up the tougher topics. You will become more knowledgeable about the topic. You can use your experience to create better experiments. So I think that for many people should be a really good starting point, instead of endlessly diving into the theory and learning about all these companies. I think it's also very much about trying it and learning about how tough it actually is to put it into practice, and then going beyond that and getting better at it.
And how easy as well. I'd like to give a little anecdote, Pim, that just speaks like exactly into what you're talking about. We were working with a group the other day, and it was just talking about how what an invitation is. An invitation means the other person gets to choose if they say yes or no. So it's a practice of autonomy. And so instead of making a list and deciding who's going to be involved in something, actually making explicit what you're trying to get and the kind of people who should be in there. And so making what's in your head explicit so the other people who receive it can make an informed decision for themselves if they engage in it or not. But you can talk about that for a long time, or you can talk about it for 5 minutes and then just everybody goes and writes an invitation for something then here and now, like right away. And it's so simple, right? And we forget, we just need to cut through the conversation and go, okay, enough talking, let's just try it. And everybody has something where you want to be inviting people into it. And then when you write it out with the consciousness around power and agency and autonomy with it, it really shifts what we're doing. And so that's the pathway of practice of doing that. I really like the fact that you're bringing us back to that.
I would like to bring up also something which is the power of acceptance. When you start out a process with this big organization, maybe to support the most enthusiastic people to accept resistance, or people that are stuck or don't want this, and just have them be accepted and listened to, because it's so much power in just letting that be. And it's also so hard for those people who want this so badly. So accepting.
Yeah, because people are at different stages and paces as well. So I often have people saying like, oh, Lisa, we have these 2 pilot teams, they're self-managed, they're great. But then like there's all these people that are like really slow and they just don't get it. And yeah, to really be okay with that they're slow and don't get it, and listen to them and accept, like see that as valid and accepted is really powerful.
When you shared that, Karin, I got really excited to think about what this next conversation could be. If this is a conversation about the beginning, I'd love to maybe the next conversation to be, what are we seeing 6 months or a year in? Because that shifts as well, right? When we begin to, I don't want to say any more, but that's what that brought up for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I like that idea. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Now, just the miraculous thing is that people start to come into it by themselves without any force, which you don't believe it. But then I had this meeting today, and the agenda was to get a guy in a leading position on board, because we didn't know where he stood in the matter, or he was a key person. And then we had this purpose of the meeting, and then he, from just 1 week, from 1 week to another, he sort of was the driving force from having been really reluctant. So you don't even have to do anything if you can accept where they are, then they go themselves.
I love that. I would add to the word acceptance a word that is illegal in American business, which is patience. And particularly because what I have learned through miserable trial and error is that, like, if you want to be able to do this move, sometimes you can't just start with that move. You have to actually build the socio-technical fabric that allows you to pull that off. And so, we, like, the Ready didn't start with self-set pay. We didn't have the fabric to do that. So we started in one place, and then over 5 years, we got more and more and more. And so I just always go back to that, like, if you look at running the 4-minute mile, or you look at Tony Hawk doing a 1080 or whatever, it always is like this: until it's possible, it's not possible. And once you see it, then you can, do it. So I don't know. There's something about patience to me that is not a gift of mine, but I'm cultivating.
Yeah. I think it's why it's difficult, this question, where do you start? Because I know it's such a cliche, but every organization is different. So, one organization might start with self-set pay because they're there and they have an enthusiasm and the energy's there. And then who am I to say, oh, I wouldn't start with that?
Totally.
I think every organization, it's like, see where the energy is. And that's why, what you shared, Pim, and in the chat, we were talking about the Ready's tension and practice cards. Like, what's stopping you from doing your best work? Like, where is the energy? Like, where could you really shift things? And then start with where you are and work with what you've got. Like, where is the energy wanting to go?
maybe share an example that really connects to this from one of the companies that we've been visiting over the past couple of years. It's an organization, it's a housing association in the UK called United Welsh. And they've been transforming the past couple of years, step by step. So they didn't have the answers. They had no clue how to do it. And their starting point was to invite a group of people to join a future workplace project. So from the organization of about 350 people, 25 of them joined this project team. And they were sent out to all around Europe to visit pioneering organizations. So it's a little like a bucket list trip for them. So the miniature version of Corporate Rebels. And they went to these companies to learn how they were working differently. And then they came back and they had 14 recommendations to the entire organization for changes to make. And they were super diverse, from creating better IT infrastructure so they could work more flexibly, to less hierarchy and more freedom in when they were working. So 14 different recommendations. And they presented it to the entire organization. And then the leadership team decided to act directly. So the next day, the CEO, Linda, went to walk around the organization with a large garbage bin. And she asked everyone in the entire organization to throw their badges in the bin so they couldn't check in and out anymore. So they wanted to have this freedom, and they wanted, like the change itself wasn't maybe that powerful, but the symbolic act was the most powerful, to show that the CEO and the leadership team was actually taking on board these recommendations. And then they created project teams around these 14 recommendations, and they started to advance in them. And these project teams had full freedom to come up with solutions on how to solve it, and to set up experiments, pilots, and then see how they could transfer that to the rest of the organization. So a super pragmatic approach, I guess, that highlights some of the elements that were discussed, like where's the frustration? What can we learn from others in how they're working differently? And then doing it, or learning it by doing it, and just learning by making mistakes and then doing it better the next time. And now I think it's 3 or 4 years after they started. And yesterday I got an email that they're now working on pay transparency, even some form of self-set pay. So they're moving in that direction step by step and just picking up new challenges as they go.
So I have a question about that, Pim. I've just put in the chat for my mind, the importance of mandates. So did that group that went off and did that field work, did they have the mandate to actually do that and the explicit understanding that what they found would be enacted?
Yeah, so up front there was already the idea, you guys are going to come up with ideas and we're going to execute on those ideas. But in most organizations, the same thing happens, but they never go on to actually moving into action. So that was the big change here, that the CEO the day after directly took these changes. But we've seen the same thing also in other organizations. Like we worked with a large fashion brand, a team of 25 people in the IT department. And they did more or less the same thing. So they went out to other organizations and read a bunch of books like Reinventing Organizations and the Connected Company. And they learned all about these different ways of working and created sort of templates. So they said, decision-making, we want to do that through the advice process. Roles distribution, we want to use a part of holacracy for that. And they kind of put together their new way of working in theory. And it took 6 months to do that. And then they started to experiment with it. And they learned that the first 6 months wasn't that useful for them. The most important thing for them was to actually try it. But it's a 25-person team in an organization of 14,000 people. And they were able to change significantly, even like their structure in their teams, the way they make decisions. So also, once again, starting from this point of frustration and visualizing where they wanted to go and then experimenting. And I think this is super powerful. If you have buy-in from the top, or if you have buy-in from just a team leader, you can go really far with that.
I think the piece in there that's critical is like having an experience, like a lived body experience of where it functions. And if you're in an organization and you've never felt it and lived it, it's hard to imagine it. And so the idea of going out is an interesting idea. It makes me think about our team meetings at Percolab. We usually have 2 to 3 guests that come in. And we have someone who came in the other day and just lived the experience and was like, oh, this is what it could be. This is how it could work. Now I get all this stuff. And then just went and implemented it the next week on her own in her organization. And I was like, oh, what about this whole idea of, opening our doors and seeing ourselves as a community of, I call them sister organizations, in which we offer immersive experiences that really help people that are struggling to really kind of fathom what it might be like, and that it won't all crash and turn into complete disaster, that it really functions.
That's such
Yeah,
a
I think
cool
this is-
idea.
Go ahead, Aaron.
That was it. I was just loving that.
I was just going to say, like, I know K2K do this as well, where they get the employees to vote, so they don't go ahead. They have to have buy-in from the senior leadership team, and then all of the employees, they have to have a threshold. I think it's like 80%. Pim, if you can remember off the top of your head.
Anyway, yeah, 80%. Yeah.
80%. If less than 80% say no, they don't do it. So the employees vote, yes, we'll do this process. And then they close the company for 2 days and they go and visit other companies that have been on this process so that they can have that embodied experience. And then I think that makes a real difference.
The part about what you said, Pim, that really stuck out to me was the immediacy part. And I would say, like, if somebody says, where do you learn what your betting odds are going to be? I would say when we do tension and practice work with clients, within 90 minutes, we're making pairings and thinking about like things we might want to experiment with. And you can just tell when it then comes time to say, all right, actually propose the experiment. Will we go do it and where? Like a third of the groups are like, oh, like suddenly it's real and they don't want to play. A third of the groups kind of muddle through and come up with some half-assed stuff to do. And a third of the groups are like, yeah, I guess tomorrow the next major product release is completely up to the team and I'm going to go to the beach. And it's like, whoa, okay. So I find that I like that moment of the next day is very telling. So if to the extent that the people listening are starting experimentation, just listen for that. Like what's the readiness to actually do something once we've stopped talking about it?
Rich, now's your chance to sound clever, Rich. Go for it.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
This is the moment.
Okay. Yeah. I can tell you what was on my mind anyway. Just how, I love that we're all being very enthusiastic and like, you just got to get started, just start some experiments. You can do it. We believe in you, which is true. And that is 80% of the work that I start with people. But the other 20% is, there are reasons sometimes that people are not making these experiments, or that they make the experiment and they get discouraged, because there's some really toxic relationships in workplaces and really toxic communication cultures. And so that's this like, we'll experiment our way through it. It's like, even surfacing the information about what are we going to work on and then reviewing it afterwards to check if it was good or not. Like if the trust isn't there, as Karin mentioned right at the start, like if you haven't got that trust foundation, some of these experiments are not actually going to go anywhere. And that's, I think that requires a bit more of a surgical, like there's a specific blockage between two people and that actually needs to be specifically attended to before you're going to get anywhere. Or you need someone that's actually, that's taking that sort of more psychological approach and thinking about what's getting in the way. And that's a real factor, and sometimes you can kind of route around those and just get started anyway. But it kind of depends on who the person is. And sometimes you're just not going to make any headway until that blockage is, and it's like coming to some kind of, it's not going to necessarily be solved, but that there's like some kind of healing underway. And that, I think that's a job for specialists, to be honest. What I was about to say though before that was that there's 8 minutes left on the clock, and maybe that's enough time for each of us to have a last word. And I'll say that was my one. And in the spirit of patience and listening and things, maybe we could take a breath and enjoy some silence and then share your last word.
Okay, let me start with my last word then. I partly agree with you, Rich, partly disagree with you as well. I think there are some people that prefer to be kind of ready in this trusting environment before they start and before they can successfully start. I also think some people are more comfortable by just trying it and then building up that trust to get there. And I think you can compare it a bit to entrepreneurship. Some people love to craft business plans and plan everything up front. Get a lot of feedback from other people around them before they get started with a really well thought out plan. Other people just get started with the basic idea of that's roughly where I want to go. I have no clue how I'm going to do it, and we'll just learn and try and experiment along the way. I think there's not one right way to go there, and I think it's up to the individuals to figure out what really works for them. Because to tell one person that loves to plan up front before doing something and to really think it through, to just start experimenting, as I would probably advise them, is definitely the wrong thing for such a person. And the other way around as well, for a person that just wants to get going, to tell them first you need to be ready, you have to have this trusting environment. It might be better to just saying go at it. And that's the tough thing. And I think Lisa already mentioned it. Depends so much on the team, the organization, the individuals, which makes it tough because there's not one answer. But that was a really vague last word, but I'm happy that I've said it.
And why don't you nominate someone?
Me? That's going to be the truly last word then. Susan.
Just really grateful for this conversation. It's super enlivening, and I hope that we can continue doing this regularly. And I think for as much as I harp on about true system transformation can't actually happen without the individuals who are currently holding the control. I do really just want to encourage everybody that within everybody's remit is this 15% discretionary time to try stuff. And just a very quick example, last night I was on a call with a big international scientific agency and a group within that organization that's almost like an internal union who's trying to figure out how to elevate the needs of the workers around career development and individual development. And they're going to have a big thing next week where they're talking about how do they pick the top ones to bring forward to the powers that be, and talking about what would it look like if the 30 people that are in that group left the room with something they felt like they could bring forward into action. And the person who's organizing says, but Susan, they don't have any power. They can't actually affect anything. And then we started talking about it, and it's like, well, could, for example, you leave the session thinking that the next time you have a conversation with the people who you're responsible for, you could take an extra half hour just to have a cup of coffee and talk about what they'd like for their career. So very simple human steps are things that we can all take to start getting into relationship, to start understanding interdependence, and whether our chance or opportunity to transform something comes tomorrow, next week, 5 years, 10 years, building those muscles are something that we can all start doing now. So that's what came up for me on the basis of like this idea of experiments. And I'm going to ping Karin.
Yeah, it was a question about empowerment, and very often empowerment is interpreted that somebody should inspire or be in a way to empower somebody else, which yeah, so that empowerment, I would like to take the opportunity of just saying something about my view is that empowerment is a state of being, and it's a being in a way so people around you choose to take out their capacity. And that's what I'm interested in releasing in an organization, people being empowering as a state, and it doesn't matter whatever title they have. Yeah, Aaron.
Let me get my monocle in place for a sinister, counterintuitive checkout. As I sit with this, all the machinations and coaching and adjustments and nuance of what we talk about and do is wonderful, and that's what makes our profession and our livelihood and our passion, made manifest. But the other part of me as a parent is just like, you ever seen a kid get interested in something and how they figure it out and become who they're going to become? All the people that are the best at this got psyched about it, sweated it, read everything, talked to everybody, broke a bunch of eggs, made a bunch of omelets, and made shit happen. There's very little we can do to stop someone who's that bought in, and there's very little we can do to make someone who's not there become that thing. The kid who's going to be a ballerina is going to be a ballerina. So at some level, like, I don't know, listen and tune in for that. And if that's you and you're not in a place where you can be that person, then go somewhere else if you can't wait. And if you can wait, then it's God's work and we're right there with you. And there you go. Let's see. Lisa, have you gone?
No.
Great. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's sort of final thought I'm leaving with, or that I want to share is just to talk about it, like talk about what's there, and I think to make that more concrete, I really like this idea of safe spaces and interaction scripts. That it's a bit scary to be like, so self-management, what do we all think about it? It's like, that's very open and scary, but this is why I like liberating structures, because it gives you containers, like a time box, how the participation is going to be distributed. It doesn't have to be liberating structure, but just like, okay, so we're gonna answer this question. We're going to do it in trios for 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back and see what we've all thought, and then harvest it on the flip chart or something. And to talk about what's going on, like, what do we think about this? What questions? What protests? What skepticisms, and for it all to be allowed to be and to listen to it and then start from there. So I think for me, it's like, whatever your approach is, I don't think there's any one way to do it, but I think just talk about the stuff that's most difficult to talk about. And you know, that's a good place to start. Samantha.
So I guess what's sitting with me is like, yeah, it doesn't matter where you start. Any way you go, you're going to follow a path that's going to take you to being more caring amongst people together, more equitable, more inclusive, and all that is really, really great. But at one point, we're going to bump up to what Richard's talking about, is the fact that there's trauma in the system, there's toxic behaviors, there's stuff going around. We all know this. And that part of me thinks that the way out of it is through more transparent, collective, conscious, ferocious ways of functioning, and part of that is this way of working. And so I am crazily optimistic for the future if we can get good at working in these ways.
Can I just say, Sam, you helped me be ferocious, so thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, Rich, Aaron, Pim, Sam, Karin, and Susan. That was Yeah, that was as riveting as the last one. So I really appreciate it. And I can't remember if I said this last time around, but the kind of this gathering, this group of people, it kind of reminds me of I guess like an imaginary conference that would probably be in San Francisco or Lisbon, and this would be the grand finale of a very expensive conference. And so yeah, thank you so much for showing up and giving us your time and your wisdom. Yeah, it was great. And we're gonna move into breakout rooms for the last 20-ish minutes and just discuss what landed. If anyone needs to drop off, that's cool, go for it. That's kind of part of, you know, people that have been watching and you authors as well. Before anybody does drop off, why don't you unmute yourself, and we'll I really enjoyed the chaotic appreciation last time around, so kind of, yeah, everyone turn your cameras and your and your mics on and say thank you to these generous people.